To celebrate New Lotto, there's a £10 million jackpot this Saturday, and there'll be 1,000 winners of £20,000 in our new raffle.
I got me ticket, don't wanna miss it.
Singing, oh, I could do one day.
New Lotto. Get your ticket now.
Lotto's now £2. Games, rules and procedures apply. For more details on the game changes, go to nationallottery.co.uk. Players must be 16 or over.
I'm Andy McCall, the LBC 97.3 Travel Centre. Still the problems in the tubes, no Circle Line anti-clockwise, severe delays clockwise. Severe delays also for the Hammersmith and City and Met lines from Baker Street to Aldgate. There's also minor delays on the rest of the Metropolitan line. Signal problems to blame at Aldgate. There's still disruption on services for First Capital Connect between Finsbury Park and Moorgate. That was after the train broke down earlier at Highbury and Islington. And C2C about quarter-hour delays between Fenchurch Street and Grays after problems with the level crossing barriers at Rainham. North Circular, pretty stacked up around Arnos Grove. The lights are playing up at Bowes Road. Delays westbound from the A10 at Great Cambridge, eastbound from Coney Hatch Lane. And just watching the cameras, queues on London Bridge northbound, and that's because of problems on Lombard Street, which is closed going east at King William Street. Keeping London moving. Next travel update is in half an hour.
LBC 97.3. Call 0845 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC 973. This is London's biggest conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Good morning to you. 5 minutes after 9 on Friday the 4th of October. Acutely aware that we've talked a lot about politics this week and had a lot of political leaders, and we're serving up another prominent leader in just a second. Let me tell you what else, just briefly, is coming up in this hour before you think, oh no, Nick, not more conversation about bread makers and Boris wearing his glasses. No, later in the hour we will explore the joy of books, as it is shown that tragically the number of children reading books is dropping, and children see reading as embarrassing. Fewer and fewer youngsters picking up a book for fun. I'll ask you, I might actually ask my guest, I'll give him a warning now, what was the book that unlocked the great world of reading? And if you've never tried it, get your children to try a book. It's the best movie, it's the best theatre, it's the best telly they'll ever not see, effectively. Books are fantastic. We'll explore the joy of reading, and we'll come to this story, and I'm only going to say it once in this setup for the story. This big game between Tottenham and West Ham, the police, the FA moving in, the ability to chant or not chant the word yid. Yes, the Y word, that's coming up later in the show. But I talked about political leaders, and we've had some prominent ones through this week. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and with us now today is the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage. I know many of you enjoy listening to Mr. Farage. I have to, before I put the calls, and that's the idea, of course, Nigel here to take your calls, answer your questions. I'm going to start, if I may, Nigel Farage, if you'll let me, actually, with a question from me. We've come to the end of the party conference season, your own and the other main parties. 2 or 3 weeks of all sorts of promises and pledges. What do you take from where the parties find themselves? And good morning.
Good morning. Overall, no change, I would say. I mean, pretty clearly, Miliband was moving to the left, or seemed to move to the left, with this populist idea about energy prices, which I found a bit rich, from the Energy Secretary himself, who did more to put up fuel bills than anybody. Cameron has done a sort of 180-degree turnaround from everything he said since 2005. He's got this new Australian advisor, Linton Crosby, the didgeridoo from Downing Street. And so suddenly Cameron's pretending that he's a tough right-wing Tory, and it doesn't sort of quite work. Nick Clegg had quite a good conference, given that the Lib Dems are struggling in the polls, but his own leadership appears to be quite solid. And UKIP, well, we had quite a dramatic conference.
You did, Nigel Farage.
It didn't exactly go according to plan, but
wouldn't be UKIP if it did, would it?
Well, but I will say this, that perhaps this was the conference at which we grew up.
In what way?
I think that, we have got where we've got by being a party of opposition. But you can't, if you're going to move on and be a serious force in British politics, have senior leading figures who just want to lob hand grenades around. And much as Godfrey Bloom is a very good personal friend of mine, what happened on that day wasn't good for us and it wasn't good for him.
And just to remind listeners, it was Godfrey Bloom, the MEP, who subsequently had the party whip removed, who was joking, referred to a group of female activists as sluts.
Yeah, and I mean, Godfrey's got a great sense of humour, but it's kind of best confined to the bar, not fringe meetings at party conferences. And it wasn't the first time this summer that he'd caused great controversy.
You like him as a bloke, though?
Oh, very much so. And he's a great fun to be with and have a drink with, and there's no malice in him at all. I mean, there really isn't. There really is not any malice in him, but he sort of sees politics as being great fun and all a huge joke, and I don't want us to take ourselves too seriously. But if you start to use language like that, what you do is distract away from the big messages.
And just lastly, before we go to the calls, Terry, you're going to be up first. Just give me one more second with Nigel Farage, if you would. Political commentators are saying, Mr. Farage, that actually we've got the clear blue water or red water, whatever you want from the parties. You've got Ed Miliband talking about various socialist policies. You've got David Cameron being far more. You still see pretty much they're all saying the same old thing.
Oh, the differences are really very small. And my challenge to all three of the other party leaders is, what are you going to do about the 1st of January next year and opening up the doors to the whole of Bulgaria and Romania? Are you actually going to do something in the interests of ordinary British working families or not? An answer, there comes none.
Terry's in Croydon. You're through to Nigel Farage. Go ahead, Terry.
Hi. With the troika of Miliband, Cameron and Clegg refusing point blank, it seems to me, to address the problem of unqualified EU migration, they've turned to migration from outside, or even visits from outside of the EU. And we've got the sad situation of many countries that we have a long, not necessarily a happy relationship with, but a long and deep relationship with, and we sort of turned our backs, so that even just a visit from some of these countries is now very difficult to achieve.
So moving you to a question, Terry, I guess you're talking about countries such as Australia and New Zealand and others. What would your question...
And India, and I just say, what can you do about that? And how can you force that troika to face questions about the EU? Yeah, I know a televised debate is difficult.
Well, let's get on to that. Would you like to be part of this TV debate, Nigel Farage?
Well, let me say this. If UKIP does well in the European elections and the local elections next year, if our poll rating...
What's do well?
Hopefully win, but even if we were second, we would still be a major player in the current British political scene. If our poll ratings continue as they are to be consistently above the Lib Dems, then frankly, to exclude us from those debates would be ludicrous.
Why?
Because we are a voice in British politics, and whilst we didn't have a huge score in 2010, a lot has changed in British politics since 2010. If they want to continually make us the outsiders, if they really think that by not having us in the debates that people won't know UKIP exists, they're making a terrible mistake.
You don't come second, you don't have those percentages perhaps you're looking for, you'd accept not being in the debate.
Well, if UKIP was back at 3% in the polls or something like that, then the argument would be that you wouldn't have UKIP, because if you had UKIP, you'd need to have the Greens and goodness knows who else. But I think if we're seen to be in the polls a serious player, we should be part of it.
Nick Clegg, undoubtedly, in the last general election series of debates, he certainly aced 2 of them, if not probably all 3. How confident are you'd perform well, Mr. Farage?
Well, you couldn't do a job like this unless you had self-confidence. But I must say, I think that forgetting personalities, I think the themes, the big question that we should be governing our own country, not having 75% of our laws made somewhere else, and that for a country that's always been open-minded and tolerant on immigration, for the numbers to go on with 500,000 people a year coming into Britain is something most of us feel is wrong. And I think on those issues, they're not going to go away, and I think public opinion will move more strongly towards the way that UKIP feels.
We had Nick Clegg on this show yesterday. He's not necessarily a huge fan of having you on, but he doesn't really see it as a deal breaker. I think he's pretty relaxed. It's David Cameron doesn't want you on,
Well,
isn't it?
David Cameron tried to redefine the thing. He said the only people that should debate are those who have a prospect of becoming Prime Minister. So presumably he's saying that his coalition partner can't be part of it next time round. They're all over the place with this.
Oh, is he frightened of you, Cameron?
Well, he should be. He really should be, because the vast majority of Conservative voters up and down the country look at so many of the things that Cameron has done, whether it's wind turbines or HS2 or gay marriage or building on the Greenbelt, and they say, is this guy a Conservative? So, for that to be exposed publicly would not do him much good.
And Terry's other point, the fact that we don't seem as welcoming perhaps to Australians and Canadians and New Zealanders as we are.
Terry used the phrase, turn our backs. And he's absolutely right. We now discriminate in favour of Poland and from next year Bulgaria and Romania, as opposed to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, people who are friends of ours, who like us, who come and stand with us and fight with us when it matters. It's complete madness. And I think we undervalue the Commonwealth. You know, there are 2 billion people that live within the Commonwealth. We have a common language. The Queen, of course, is still head of 14 of the countries. We have common law. We have a lot in common with the Commonwealth. And I would love to see us, once we've left the EU, extending the concept of free trade to the Commonwealth as well.
Nargis is in St Albans. You're on the radio, Nargis. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
I wanted to say that I'm a big supporter of UKIP, actually. And I feel you can have huge success, but you've got to try and move away from accusations of racism.
Yes, quite right.
And what I want to say really is I'm of British Asian heritage, and I do feel alienated. And the recent comments about the journalist being of ethnic extraction, I've found that very difficult to deal with, and I really feel you can have success if you can just address this.
Well, the comment of ethnic extraction was actually a fairly politically correct way of putting it. What on earth else was he supposed to say, giving a descriptive term to one of our people to meet a lady on a platform in Manchester? So, I mean, I'm not going to, I really don't think that was a sin in any way at all.
Why not use the word Asian?
Well, he wasn't sure, but he was guessing. But can I just say that the person that made that comment is married to an Indian and has a mixed-race child, all right? So any thought that the guy that uttered that was racist is clearly nonsense.
This is Gavin Towler, isn't it?
Yeah. However, Nigel raises a very serious question. Yeah. Okay. What is happening here is the establishment are so scared of us, they're going for the man and not the bull, and they're trying to label us as racist. And that awful old treacherous dinosaur, Heseltine, did it the other day, calling UKIP a racist party. Now, you may have seen yesterday on television, Amjad Bashir, he's a candidate of ours in the European elections. He's a Muslim businessman from the north of England, and he was on the television saying, look, I'm part of UKIP, my family's part of UKIP, I have not encountered racism in UKIP. So all I can tell you is, it is not true. They will continue to throw mud, but I promise you it is not going to stick.
Nargis?
Yes, that's a great answer. And I do personally feel you've done quite a lot on this. And I just urge you to keep doing it and to keep portraying your party as non-racist, because I believe you will have great success.
I promise you that is exactly what I will do.
Just lastly, as you did touch on Lord Heseltine, or the treacherous old dinosaur, as you referred to him.
Yeah.
He said yesterday, or earlier in the week, of course it's racist. UKIP, who doubts that? Farage isn't racist, but his party is very attractive to a racist agenda. So you're all right, Mr. Farage, it's your party.
Yeah, well, of course, he knows that you can't libel political parties. So I think he was being rather careful about that.
If he'd said that of you...
if he'd said it of me, then clearly there would have been some potential there for action if one wants to spend one's life with lawyers and going to court. I don't particularly. But, I mean, Heseltine does this, and he's been doing it for years. He is, of course, one of the greatest cheerleaders for Britain being part of the European project. He was desperate for us to join the Euro, and the sooner Mr. Cameron puts him out to grass, the better, in my view.
And just to close this field down, we've not spoken for a couple of weeks. Since we last chatted, there was this report of you marching through Sussex singing Hitler Youth songs.
Yeah.
Dulwich College.
That was a grave exaggeration. I was at Dulwich College in the 1970s, and I was really, at times, I have to be honest, quite difficult, argumentative.
I find that extraordinary.
Yeah, honestly, as a teenager. And we did have, in my later time there, a couple of new teachers who came to the school who were what I would call the class of 68. Extreme left-wingers, and I did delight in upsetting them as much as I possibly could.
Including singing these songs?
No, I deny that.
Okay.
But, did I say things?
But we're in right at Loic.
Did I? Yes.
Right, all right. Sarah's in Reigate. Come on, Sarah, you're on the radio.
Hi, Nigel.
Good morning.
All teenagers are difficult.
You're speaking as a mum who's raised some, I sense, perhaps.
I'm non-racist. I have friends from all over the world, and I think that's one thing. I agree with the previous caller. You've got to get that out of your party, because that's not good. But what would you have done with these Romanian gypsies in Park Lane? They've been given money to go home, and they've come back again.
Of course.
What would you have done? Who gave them the money?
Well, you did. You're the taxpayer. You're funding all of this. And it's interesting you raise this, because this morning, Kent County Council have produced a report under pressure from the UKIP councillors in Kent. We've asked for an impact assessment of what will happen in Kent next year once Bulgaria and Romania join. And Kent County Council's estimate is that 8,000 to 9,000 Romanians and Bulgarians will settle in Kent over the next couple of years, and that it will cost taxpayers in Kent at least £3 million a year extra. And that's just Kent. we're talking about. And the leader of Kent County Council, who is a Conservative, is quite rightly calling on Cameron, why don't we do a national impact assessment of what the financial cost and perhaps social cost will be? Look, the
what
answer
would
to
you
this
have done
is,
with the Romanians in the parks is coming specifically to Sarah's point. And this sort of easy jet, it's a revolving door. They go home and then they just come back again.
And I understand,
Yes,
and I understand from January next year.
Hold on.
Go on.
Sarah.
My point is, shouldn't they have their passport stamped, not allowed back into the UK? So simple.
They're members of the same country now as us. Ed Miliband used the word.
I can't go to Spain and do this.
Well, we obey the rules, and the Spanish don't always.
But who paid them the money to go home?
Local authorities.
Well, we did. I mean, it's paid for effectively out of council tax. Out of council tax, effectively.
Let Mr. Farage, Sarah, back to you. Let Mr. Farage just explore some points.
Let's get to the nub of this. You know, whether it's Romanian gypsies in Park Lane, whether it's somebody from any other part of Eastern Europe who comes here and commits a crime, you know, there's no point sending them back because they can come back again. And what we've done is we've effectively, through political union, these people are now effectively the same nationality as us. And I think that's wrong, and that's a mistake. And what we should do is we should have a sensible immigration policy where if people want to come and work here, we give them work permits, but we don't extend the social security system to them. And certainly if they commit crimes, we say, off you go and you can't come back.
How do we make sure they don't come back? Just get on a plane and return.
Very easy. We leave the European Union and we take back our... It's the only thing we can do.
No, I'm saying we can't do anything now. We can't print their passport. Stamp. No.
There is nothing we can do. And the worry is this. There are between 4 and 5 million of the Roma Gypsy communities living in Romania and Bulgaria. They are completely excluded from normal life. They haven't got jobs. They live in, and I visited their camps, they live in appalling conditions. And you can hardly blame them for wanting to better their lives. But there comes a point at which we have to say, we can't allow this. We've got to put the interests of our own communities first.
All right. Sarah, thank you. I know you've more to say, but I must move on. I must feed in some of the emails and texts that are coming in. This one comes from Pierre in Kent. Was the Daily Mail right to say what they did about Miliband's father? There we are. Someone else coming to this country to build a better life. That was Ed Miliband's late dad, Ralph.
First point is that Ed Miliband talks about his father a lot in his speeches as being his inspiration. You know, if you put your family out there on the front, then don't be surprised if they get written about and talked about and criticised. However, the Mail saying that he hated this country. I had a furious debate with Tony Benn over a cup of tea a couple of years ago. And Ben said to me, Nigel, you must understand, I'm a Republican, yes, but I'm also a patriot. And that made me think. That made me think a lot, because I'd been brought up to believe that if you were patriotic, you believed in the Queen or the King and you know, the Church of England and all of those things. And Ben made me realise that actually you can love a country and feel part of a country, but want to fundamentally change it. So I think the Mail were quite absolutely fair of the Mail to write about his father, given how much he's talked about him. But that particular phrase, I think, was a mistake.
The headline was wrong.
Yeah, the headline was wrong.
OK. Subsequently, Ed Miliband has told the newspaper proprietor, Lord Rothermere, he needs to take a long, hard look at the way his papers are being run.
Well, I mean, newspapers, like any businesses or like any of us in our lives, will make mistakes. But there is no question that over the course of the last decade or so, the Daily Mail have got a lot more right than they've got wrong. It is a massively successful newspaper. This they got wrong. The proprietor has apologised for it overnight. What I would hate to see is the fact the Mail got this wrong be used in a few weeks' time as an excuse for...
Well, it's next Wednesday.
For ratcheting up.
Yeah. Where do you stand on that, Nigel Farage, regulation of the press?
I believe in a free press. I don't think we need more law. Take the hacking case. You know, what happened was wrong. No question about that. But actually, given the laws that exist already, people who are involved in that, and I'm one of them, we've got legal redress. I think if you put a state regulator in the middle, it'll be costly, bureaucratic, and I think not just for the national press, but for local newspapers around the country, I think they'll be scared to print anything. So I do not want state regulation.
Lastly, if someone went after your dad in a similar way, how would you defend him?
Well, I'd be very upset and very angry, as Ed Miliband was. But, you know, what I don't do, Nick, is I'm not photographed with my children or my wife or my dad. I never talk about them in my speeches, and I regard my family as not being fair game.
Greg is in Stanford in Essex. You're on the radio, Greg.
Yes, good morning to you both and to everybody.
Good morning.
I am of a Polish origin, and I'm listening to LBC constantly. I'm first-time caller, so I'm a little bit nervous.
You're doing a great job. Just move to your question, sir. Thank you.
Not as much I would like to ask a question, but also comment a little bit of what Mr. Farage just said a minute ago about the immigration from Canada and Australia, how they were bravely, how you connected to them as a Commonwealth, and how fantastically they were helping and fighting. And at the same sentence, you have also Mr. Farage commented that it's actually preferred than the Poles or other nations from Europe. Just to remind you that I'm actually very rarely can see Canadian or Australian or New Zealand monuments from Second World War, where there is a lot of them from Polish origin, military service that was fighting.
Okay, the important role that Polish soldiers and indeed airmen as well played. Greg, stay on the line, Mr. Farage.
Yes, they did. You're absolutely right. And in fact, after 1945, we did allow a significant number of Polish people to stay in this country, and that was our means of saying thank you. So I accept that point. And look, can I just say this? I'm not anti-Poland or anti-Polish people. In fact, many of the Poles that have come to Britain have worked damned hard and done well. No question about that. My problem, Greg, is this, that when we opened the door to Poland and the other countries in 2004, the government told us it would lead to an extra 13,000 a year, okay? 800,000 came in the first 2 years. So it is a question of numbers, and we now find young British people, and in particular the figures are showing many members of the ethnic minorities, established ethnic minorities in Britain, in that young age bracket, cannot get work and find themselves now effectively discriminated against in their own country, and that is the problem.
Greg, thank you. Another text here. This comes from Dippy in Ealing. Would my daughters be allowed to wear the veil if they went to school under UKIP?
No. I think we've really reached I'm pleased that at last we're having a public debate on this. I mean, I don't think the French and Belgians have got this right. I don't think you can tell people what to wear walking down Oxford Street. You know, I really don't, or in a public park. But I do think when it comes to being at school, or when it comes to being in an airport, or when it comes to going into a bank, we have to have a set of rules that applies equally and evenly to everybody. And I, one of the biggest concerns I have for British society going forward is I want it to be integrated, not separated.
So a Muslim woman can walk down Oxford Street with her veil on, but she gets to Barclays or NatWest or RBS just to take the veil off?
I think that's absolutely right. Okay. If you walked in to NatWest wearing a motorcycle crash helmet, the alarms would all go off. So we have to have equality before the law.
And a story in the paper today of which you've not had sight. There's 2 Muslim schoolboys at a grammar school, Catholic grammar school in Lancashire. They're 14, but they're growing beards because, we mature quicker than we did perhaps in my day. The head teacher says, shave them off or you'll be excluded. They won't. Who's right, who's wrong here?
Well, the whole point about school rules, although, be honest, I did break a few myself, but the whole point about school rules, again, it's the same principle, isn't it? It's the even application of a set of rules to everybody, regardless of their background or religion.
Paula's in Cricklewood. Go ahead, Paula.
Yes, good morning. I just have a quick question. I'm considering joining UKIP, but one thing that puzzles me is I'm not really very clear on what the UKIP see as their future. If, let's say, we left Europe and, let's say beyond the Europe and immigration question, I'm not very clear on what UKIP sees as its future.
Well, Paula,
is it just an opposition party, or does it want...
The whole point of our conference, and why I was rather upset with what happened, is the story I wanted to get out that was somewhat overshadowed, was that this party, which started off as an opposition party that stamped its feet, made a lot of noise, and tried to raise awareness on a fundamental issue about who governs this country that the rest had buried, we've changed, we've evolved, we've moved on. And we're now not just talking about who governs Britain, we're now talking about that Britain once we've had the referendum and got us out of the European Union. And that's why we're talking about things like a sovereign wealth fund to help for old age care by taxing some of the profits of shale gas, which we simply need to exploit. That's why we're talking about the need for selective education for argument's sake, to give people, from poor backgrounds the similar opportunities to those that go to Eton. So we are developing a full, positive manifesto for how this country should be governed. UKIP is not a pressure group. It is not a spin-off of the Conservative Party. It's a new political force, and it is here to stay.
Thank you for that. A text, Florence in Dartford. Do you agree with David Cameron? Children have to learn to earn. Not quite children, I think, but these are school leavers up to the age of 25, isn't it?
Yes, Mr. Cameron. And if we didn't have open-door immigration and a massive oversupply in the unskilled labour market, many more of our youngsters would get work. Speak to youngsters who go to university, who used to do the bar work or work in hotels or whatever it is. They struggle like hell to get a job at all. We've got massive oversupply in the unskilled labour market, and for Cameron to say, that the under-25s shouldn't be able to qualify for anything unless they're out there working, well, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but you and the others have caused this problem.
Sarah's in Streatham. You're through to Nigel Farage. Sarah.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello, Sarah.
Good morning. My question is, if you were to get into power, what would you do about all this millions of pounds of overseas aid that this country's sending out, when really it could be best spent in this country?
I think you count it in billions, actually, Sarah.
Well,
billions.
It's nearly £1 billion a month, Sarah. You may have seen a horrible story in the news yesterday, an Italian island called Lampedusa, and there were some migrants coming from North Africa. The ship sank and about 300 of them drowned. It's a very nasty story. And one of the reasons this is going on is because Africa, I'm afraid, or not all of it, but much of Africa, sinks deeper into lawlessness and poverty. And whilst you can't wave a magic wand and change everything, I think, Sarah, what we should do is this. Rather than giving £1 billion a month to these countries, knowing that much of that money will actually not reach the right target, what we ought to do, and we could do if we were outside of the European Union, is we could help Africa by reducing the huge tariffs Europe places when they want to sell us cut flowers, they want to sell us green beans. We rape and pillage their fisheries off the west coast of Africa, and we need to help those poor countries to trade their way out of poverty rather than trying to assuage our own consciences by giving them money.
So turning the tap off slowly, not literally turning it off overnight, just a gradual decrease.
Yes, I mean, but frankly, I think all of us feel that the money's not being spent properly. Trade, not aid.
We're there, except for a text, an email and a question from me. The text comes from Judy in North London. Is it true that there's going to be a deal done at the next election? Conservative MPs, where they are Eurosceptic, you will not field a candidate?
No.
Thank you very much indeed. That's simple. This comes from Alice, who says Tottenham Hotspur and West Ham United fans have been told they can't chant the word "yid" ahead of their game on Sunday. Is that fair?
Yes.
You think, why is that?
Well, I think, it's pretty offensive, isn't it? And I think, look, football has changed and improved massively over the course of the last couple of decades. And we want people to have fun, but clearly a chant like that is just insulting and nasty.
Last one from me. Have you got a bread maker?
If we have, Nick, I've got to tell you, I've never used it.
That would be perhaps Mrs. Farage. Nigel Farage will be back with us again in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
Leader
you.
of UKIP, Nigel Farage, appearing here on LBC 97.3, where news is next.
Max Clifford has arrived at Southwark Crown Court to enter pleas on charges of indecent assault on